So we are on module 2 unit 1. Let us start by talking about what is a market, and this is something I have already mentioned in module 1. If you remember that market is an economic institution where we see the interaction of economic agents. Now economic agents are really people like you and me, the citizens of a country, and if you remember we had categorized economic agents into two groups, that is the buyers and sellers. So basically the market is an economic institution where we can study the interaction of the buyers and the sellers. Now in the demand and supply model we really study these interactions of the buyers and the sellers. When we look at the interaction of the buyers, when we look at things from the buyer's perspective, it is called the demand model. When we look at things from the seller's perspective, it is called the supply model, and then when we bring the two sides together we are able to see how the interaction of these buyers and sellers influences the market, and then how the changes in their decision might affect the price and the quantity bought and sold in a market. So that is exactly what we are going to see in this unit. So we will start by talking about the demand side. Now on the demand side we are going to talk about the quantity demanded by the buyers, and this quantity demanded is denoted as Q with the suffix D. So the quantity demanded is what the buyers are willing and able to buy. So quantity demanded really is defined as amount of a good that the buyers are willing and able to buy. So you can see that when we talk about quantity demanded, there is an embedded or inherent concept of willingness, and there is also an embedded concept of ability. So the buyer should be willing to buy this quantity and they should be able to buy this quantity. Now as soon as we talk about willingness, we are basically talking about the preference or the choice of the buyers, that is what they decide to buy. And as soon as we talk about ability, we are basically talking about their purchasing power, that is what price they are willing and able to pay. So quantity demanded is basically an amalgamation of both these concepts, both willingness as well as ability of the buyer to buy something. Now on the demand side, we look at the relationship of the quantity demanded by the buyers, that is QD, with the market price of the commodity, and let's call the price of the commodity or good, let's denote that as P own, where the prefix own, this just stands for the own price of the good. So if we are talking about apples, QD is the quantity demanded by the buyers for this commodity apples, and P own is just the unit price of apples. So on the demand side, we look at the relationship between QD and the own price of the commodity. Now one more thing, please note that each time that I am talking about quantity demanded or I am talking about the own price, I am talking about a good or I am talking about one particular commodity. That means here we are talking about demand or supply from the context of one particular commodity or one particular market. So really we are talking about the demand and the supply model from a micro perspective. This is something you should understand very clearly. Here we are talking about the demand or supply from a micro perspective because we are talking about the quantity demanded or the price of one particular commodity, and hence we are going to talk about the market of that one commodity, and whatever that commodity be, it could be apples, it could be oranges, it could be cars, it could be ice creams, it could be anything under the sun, but we are precisely talking about one market, one commodity at a time. Now let's come back to the relationship between quantity demanded and own price of the commodity. Think about your own behavior in a market. If you walk into a market and you want to buy, let's say, a pair of jeans, right, you are willing to pay a certain amount, you are willing to pay a certain price for that pair of jeans. Now if you get to know that the price has gone down, there is a discount being offered, then you are willing to buy more of the commodity. And if you get to know that the price of the commodity for whatever reason has gone up, there has been a markup on the price of pair of jeans, then you are willing to buy less of the commodity. So we can clearly say that there is an inverse relationship between the quantity demanded and the own price of the commodity. As own price goes up, the quantity demanded comes down, and as own price goes down, the quantity demanded for the commodity goes up. Now in this class, I am always going to denote an increase with an up arrow, and I am going to denote a decrease with a down arrow. So please do not be confused with these arrows and carefully note the direction. So we are saying that when we talk about the relationship between quantity demanded and the own price of the commodity, there is really an inverse relation. As price goes up, quantity demanded comes down, and the other way it is true as well. Now this relationship is true given that everything else in the market stays constant. By constant, I mean unchanged. Nothing else in the market changes. Now this, everything else remaining unchanged, this is also called ceteris paribus condition. So everything staying unchanged, this is also known as ceteris paribus condition. So I could say that ceteris paribus, quantity demanded decreases as price of the commodity increases, and vice versa. Now this statement, this inverse relationship between quantity demanded and the own price of the commodity when everything else stays unchanged, is also known as the law of demand. So this is the formal statement for the law of demand. The law of demand is nothing but the inverse relationship between quantity demanded and own price of the commodity given the ceteris paribus condition. Now if we plotted this law of demand for an individual, if we wanted to plot this relationship, the real relationship between price and quantity demanded for a commodity in a two-dimensional graph, if we made a graph of this relationship, then we would get the demand curve or the demand schedule. So the demand curve is nothing but a graphical representation of the law of demand. So next we are going to look at the derivation of the demand curve, how we end up getting the market demand curve for from individual demand curves.